History of hamburgers. Tonight, I'm going to take you all on a journey to Burger Town. We're going to take a jet flight history through hamburgers. Now, you would all think that hamburgers have a lot to do with the city of Hamburg in Germany, wouldn't you? Well, the truth is that it couldn't be farther from the truth. Because hamburgers are a completely 100% American creation. Now, the only connection that I could see from the research I did that connects Germany with hamburgers would be a nomadic people called the Tartars, who rampaged and pillaged Asia and Eastern Europe, like 600 years ago or something. And they were very fond of their beef, and they had a very interesting way of eating it. They didn't cook it; they ate it raw. Hence, we have the term steak tartare. But they took these steaks and they tenderized them by putting them between themselves and their saddle, which they stayed on for days at a time. And through heat and friction, they cooked the meat. Now, when the Tartars arrived around Germany, they brought their love of beef with them, and the Germans loved barbecue. So the connection between Hamburg and American hamburgers is probably because the German immigrants came to America and brought their ways of living with domesticated cattle and their barbecue. So that's as far as Hamburg is with hamburgers. Let's fast forward to the late 1800s when we had the first patents for the meat grinder, which is really instrumental in turning the Hamburg steak from a steak into the patty that we all know now. Now, after the meat grinder, little hamburger chains started to pop up around the United States. On the East Coast, there was one called White Castle. But it wasn't really until the 1950s that hamburgers really took off. Now, I have to tell you something about the 50s. I was born in 1952. And my mother tells me that in the 50s, we baby boomers were born at a time when the world was green and verdant with possibilities. It just was, there was just nothing anybody couldn't hope to accomplish. And the 1950s also brought a surgence of a car culture in Southern California. Now, cars in the 50s were big, huge, big wide seats, and they were a lot of fun to ride in. And hence the drive-in burger joint came into existence. Now, Southern California has the weather, and we have the freeways, which all began to start emerging down in Los Angeles. And San Bernardino was an area that was picked because of its working class population as being a great place to put a hamburger joint. Now, the hamburgers joints started out as drive-ins, cars, drive-ins. Now, one worth noting that I really like is Bob's Big Boy. They hired a Warner Brothers cartoonist to create this little guy who was a gigantic statue in front of the restaurants. And not only did Bob's Big Boy create this cute little guy with his pompadour, but he had the idea of cutting a bun into 3 instead of 2 and putting 2 patties, which meant that the bread in between soaked up all the juice of the burgers. It was just delicious and became very popular. Now, Bob's Big Boy also was the first to implement quality control and portion control, which was really important if you want to make money. You can't have cooks being overly generous with the food. Bob's Big Boy also was the first to have huge signage that you could see for miles away on the freeways. 2 stories high, neon, bright. So Bob Big Boy was really around a little bit before the McDonald's. Now, we're going to get to McDonald's. I have a personal history with McDonald's. I grew up in Malibu, and before that, San Fernando Valley, and my parents decided that my siblings and I should be athletic, and they decided that swimming would be our sport. So my mother would drive us to Sherman Oaks, to Santa Monica, to the various swim clubs. And in the winter, this was a couple times a week. In the winter, it was cold and dark, and I remember being really, our eyes would be all red with rainbows coming around because of all the chlorine in the pool. We didn't have goggles at the time. And so I remember stopping at McDonald's and getting hamburgers on the way home from swimming workout. We were starving, and my mother just thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. But McDonald's, those first little burgers were 10 to a pound. Do you know how tiny that is? It will take 4 of them to equal 1 Eureka burger. So those are very tiny, and they were very simple. A hamburger is a very cheap, easy, and fast thing to put together. And it was perfect for the drive-in culture because people were starting to be able to eat with your hands and not need any flatware. And this is a picture of the first McDonald's in San Bernardino. It was a drive-in. And you were delivered your hamburger by these cute little perky waitresses. Now, everything was fine. People loved the perky waitresses, except there was a problem because the fry cooks wanted to date the waitresses, and if the waitresses didn't want to date the fry cooks, then the fry cooks would take it out on them by withholding their hamburgers. And they'd have to keep going and apologizing to the customers for why their hamburgers were coming out. So the McDonald's brothers decided that we need to speed things up because, you know, at the 50s we were getting into jet propulsion and efficiency and speed. So self-service was decided upon. Now, as you know, we have all kinds of forms of self-service now. Some you order, you get delivered, you take your number, or whatever. But by far the most obnoxious self-service has to be Jack in the Box. Welcome to Jack in the Box. May I take your order, please? I'll have 4 bonus jacks, heavy on the secret sauce. 4 milkshakes, 3 fries, and a taco. And the commercial was a big giant fire engine where the driver would drive up to Jack in the Box, spit out the order, and by the time the rear of the fire engine arrived, the order was done in a bag. But this brings me up to Ray Kroc, who actually could be a whole speech in himself. But Ray Kroc, as you know, if you saw the movie, made a deal with the McDonald's brothers that they would get half of 1% for all the burgers that he'd sell. And it grew slowly for the first 3 years. But by 1958, there were 34 restaurants. And in 1 year, he doubled that. He added 68 restaurants, bringing the total to 102 locations, and that was in 1959. And the rest is history. We all know what's happened with McDonald's.